You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have back on the Goldstein on Gelt show Michael Starbird, a professor of math at the University of Texas. For those of you who missed the first interview, be sure to download the podcast of it at goldsteinongelt.com or just check it out on YouTube. Michael, pleasure to have you back.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Last time we spoke about a number of issues from your recent book, The 5 Elements of Effective Thinking. We spoke about creativity and how people can think more deeply. I'd like to touch on something today which is more related to your work, I think, as a mathematician, which is the field of statistics.
Okay.
As an investment advisor, I deal with statistics all the time, and I present them to my clients in certain ways in order to make it easy for them to understand. Unfortunately, I feel that the people out there, whether they're getting it from the news or from reading reports, they have such data overflow, or from their advisors as well. And, we explain concepts like Monte Carlo simulation and various other statistics related to stocks and bonds. How could you advise an advisor to explain a concept to someone so the client would walk away and be able to make a rational decision?
Well, of course, this is a wonderful question. I would say that the first thing is to emphasize the fact that's captured in a quotation by Albert Einstein, who said, "The whole of mathematics is merely a refinement of everyday thinking." That to realize there's nothing magic about statistical evidence. It really is plain English language descriptions of the world, but stated in ways that allow more precision. So I would say that in explaining ideas to a client, or as I explain a technical idea to somebody, I'm always thinking to myself, the idea really is just being more specific about a way of talking that people use in everyday descriptions of the world. In other words, the whole of, for example, numbers, the regular numbers, I think of it as just a refinement of the concept of more and less.
Okay.
More, and in a way, that's all that numbers are. That is the real numbers. Just more than, there are other examples of numbers that go beyond that, complex numbers and other kinds of fancier numbers. But the standard concept of numbers is just saying that it's so natural to think of more and less, and yet we want to make it much more precise. And the way to make it more precise is that we have developed this wonderful concept of number. And that is the core, really, of statistics and that kind of reasoning. That what we're really getting across is the idea that we can be precise. And particularly, we can be precise about the unknown. To me, that is one of the magical ideas, the idea that we can measure probabilistic ideas, things where we don't know what's going to happen, but we can be somewhat or quite precise about the likelihood that something will happen.
So that is something that we do a lot in the financial world. In fact, as I touched on the concept of a Monte Carlo simulation, which is used in many areas of science as well as in finance to look at 1,000 or 100,000 different possible scenarios in order to make a decision. Is that what you're referring to?
Exactly right. That the idea that this is an everyday concept. The idea would be to say, well, suppose that we could envision the world as it is today and guess what the future is likely to be. And one way to do that would be to say, oh, well, let's just run simulations of the future, but we run them thousands of times. And then we can see among those thousands of times which futures seem to come up most often, and that way that could influence our decisions about what actions we take today in order to have the highest likelihood that we're going to be in living making decisions that are beneficial in the futures that are most likely to occur.
Okay, so that's an academic way of looking at it. For example, if I were to show that to a client, which I do, in other words, when I present a financial plan, we have a whole discussion about Monte Carlo, and ultimately the conclusion is, Mr. and Mrs. Client, if you continue along this path of saving and spending and this type of investment, you have, let's say, an 80% chance of success. So then I say, okay, now make a decision. Are you satisfied? Are you comfortable with that? But a good question which clients frequently ask is, yeah, great, Doug, I have an 80% chance of success, but what if we end up in that other 20%? It's like when they tell you they say the weather, there's a 30% chance of rain, so you don't bring an umbrella, but well, if it rains.
That's right. That's right. And of course, I mean, the reality is that we cannot predict the future with certainty. That's the whole the underlying reality of our lives, by the way, not only in the financial world, but in many other aspects of life, is that there are many features of it which are random. And this, of course, is uncomfortable for a lot of people because they would prefer to have a world in which certainty was the dominating theme. But in the reality is, particularly in the financial world, is that there's a great deal of just randomness. So when your client comes in and you say, okay, there's an 80% chance that you will be in good condition for your future financial well-being on retirement, and they say, well, what's going to happen in the other 20%? I think the correct answer is, you'll have to deal with that if it comes along. That change is possible, and change, in fact, will happen, and you shouldn't expect any decision today to be a permanent decision anyway. So be comfortable with the idea that you're making a decision that's most likely to be useful, but if it's not, then you have to rethink it when the contingency arises.
Okay. We are talking with Professor Michael Starbird from the University of Texas. He's actually been on the Goldstein on Gelt show before, so if you missed that interview, download it at goldsteinongelt.com. He also wrote a book called The 5 Elements of Effective Thinking, which we spoke about in the last show, so I would strongly suggest you take out the book and learn a lot about how to make better decisions. Michael, we were just touching on this concept of certainty. There are certain investments which people can buy which are more certain or safer than others. We talk about bank deposits or U.S. Treasury bonds as being certainly much safer than, stocks or mutual funds or something like that. Is that not the type of certainty that you were referring to?
Well, okay. I mean, those things are certain in some sense, and not. But there certainly are contingencies in the world in which even such investments as those are not completely certain. For example, if you have huge inflation, in which the actual dollars that you make are just less meaningful, those are certainly a possibility. It's happened in history. It'll
probably happen again too.
I didn't want to say that. I'll let you say that.
Well, no, I would disclaim that by saying that past performance is no guarantee of future returns. But if I can quote your own words to you, you have a section in your book which is titled or subtitled "Look Back, Look Forward," which seems to suggest that looking backwards gives you some indication of what's going forward. And this contradicts greatly what I tell people all the time, which is past performance is no guarantee or is not indicative of future returns. Can you make these two come together, or are they really opposing concepts?
No. I can absolutely, because what you are referring to when you're saying past performance is is not necessarily related to the future has to do with an understanding of randomness. And this is one of the things that I teach my students, and it's a difficult idea. That what's happened in the past, if you have a random process, like you're flipping a coin, if you flip a coin 10 times and it just accidentally came up heads all 10 times, the probability of it coming up heads or tails the next time is exactly 50%, regardless of what happened the previous 10 times. And we actually, by the way, just for your amusement, we actually simulated exactly that situation where we flipped a coin 11 times and we did it 1,064,000 times, that experiment of flipping it 11 times, in order that roughly 1,000 times it came up heads the first 10 times in a row by luck alone. Mm-hmm. And the 11th time, sure enough, 50-50, roughly, heads and tails. the past does not influence the future.
You must have a lot of grad students who work for you to flip all those coins.
I have to admit it was a computer simulation, but let's not say.
Okay.
It's more fun to talk about coins. But the point is that to reconcile it, the past is one of the random options that has occurred. I mean, just think about your own life. You met certain people. You went to a certain school, you took certain classes, you had certain teachers. Various things happened that led you in the one path that your previous life actually took. But you can think back and say, well, suppose that I had met a different person, a different teacher. I went to a different school. You would live an entirely different life. But the different you of today would have looked back and seen that one path that led to where you are now. The thing is, for all of us, the future is this potentially many different paths that may happen, both to us personally and in the financial world and every other aspect of the world. And the choice of which path is going to actually accrue has not yet been determined. So I think understanding this is a very subtle idea about randomness and what to expect from randomness. But that is really at the heart of statistical reasoning. And it is something that human beings don't have an instinctive clarity about, but you can develop a good, clear intuition by study. And
Okay, so let's say someone does that, and let's say then he becomes a professor of mathematics, and he teaches people about this, and he really knows a lot about it, and he has all of his colleagues who are similarly, with their PhDs in statistics and math and randomness and all. How come they're not the richest people out there?
I wish you would answer. Now, finally, you're asking the right question here, and I wish you'd help me with that. Yeah, no, this is a very good question. I mean, the first point is that the goal of life is not to be the richest person.
But you wouldn't object.
I wouldn't mind. You can feel free to send me good advice, and I'll take it. But it's also true that one of the most fundamental aspects of that we learn from this understanding of an appreciation of randomness is that a lot of aspects of, for example, financial future are in fact random, and that a person is not necessarily going to, by thinking that you're making good decisions, you may or may not actually be choosing the best possible outcome. I'll tell you what the best investment is, by the way. If you want to know what the best investment is to help people to have.
Wait, I'm not sure we can say this on the air, but okay, go ahead. Share it with us.
Buy the winning lottery ticket.
Aha, I hear.
You see, that would be the best investment. The only problem is you don't know which one it is. Mm-hmm. And in a way, that's a metaphor for choices and financial choices and others that a person makes in life.
But frankly, it suggests, with all due respect to you and to me and to our professions, it's all well and good what we're saying about simulations and randomness and probability, but it sounds like we're just spinning our wheels if the math professors and the financial advisors aren't the richest guys out there.
Well, I think it's, first of all, I'm not convinced that the ability to predict the future of the financial instruments is a science. I mean, I don't know how much confidence you personally have in your ability to predict the future of.
No, none. I don't claim to have any prophecy.
Exactly, and I think that is the real insight of people who know what they're doing in these businesses, and that is that we don't know. We don't know, and that's just reality. Whether we'd prefer it a different way, it doesn't matter. The fact is that we don't know, and then we have to operate within those constraints. And if the persons who actually do the very best in this world probably are just lucky.
Mm-hmm. They're the black swans, as they say.
The black swan, the person who bought the winning lottery ticket. That's the person who's made the best financial decision. But nobody would say, "Oh, that person had great insight." It's just a matter of randomness that happened to work out for that person. So it's a little bit uncomfortable, to be honest, for many, many people to realize that many aspects of life are really random. And you'd prefer something sort of overseeing us and making sure every step that we take is correct. But I fear that is not the way of the world.
All right. Well, with that, Michael Starbird, professor of mathematics at the University of Texas, we are just about out of time. Thank you, first of all, and tell me, how can people follow your work?
Well, you can look at the book, The 5 Elements of Effective Thinking. That would be a good start. But I wanted to say one final word, which
Sure.
is that I hope that we haven't left too negative an impression about the world with these statements. That it seems to me that by making the decisions that we can, by really thinking clearly about the world that we have, all of us can live much happier, more productive, and innovative lives by actually using the resources that we have in effective ways.
Okay, we will leave that as our conclusion. Professor Michael Starbird, thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.